Alright, we're going to be going through the process of taking the spindle out of a 340/20 twin grip centerless grinder. First step that we want to do is, if this is a manual machine, we want to make sure that the diamond is retracted out of the way. We don't have a wheel in here currently, but we want to just go ahead and retract the diamond. In this case it's a servo, it's all the way back, but we just want to make sure that it's out of the way so we don't damage the diamond tooling. Then first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove 4 bolts. 2 here, and then 2 more on this side. Okay, now that we got the 4 bolts off and we got the hood up, we have it propped up as you can see here. Next step is we need to take out 6 bolts. We have 4 on this side, then we have 6 more on this side. We also have to take off this strap, which is bolted on right there. Okay, we also want to make sure that, this is a nice clean machine, but if there's any dirt or swarf or grit or anything packed in around here, that we want to get that all cleaned out, so once we take the spindle caps off, that we don't get anything down in the bearing area. Okay, now that we got the spindle cap removed, we need to go ahead and disconnect the 2 hydraulic fittings. These are just quick disconnect fittings. Then we need to go ahead and rotate the spindle until we get to the master link in the chain, which is right here. Then we can go ahead and pull that out to take the chain off. Okay, on this end of the machine, once you have the spindle cap removed, go ahead and remove these 2 hydraulic lines. And then it's important to cap the spindle off just so you don't get any hydraulic oil leaking out. So we would recommend that. Okay, now we have our wheel lifter installed on an overhead crane. You can also use a jib crane if there's one attached to the machine. We go ahead and make sure that the wheel lifter is in the grooves there. Once it's secured in there, we can go ahead and lift the wheel out of the machine. Alright, so now we got the spindle out of the machine. Now this is a nice clean machine, but first thing we want to do is go through and scrape and make sure that there's no crap, swarf, anything around there, and that it's going to be nice and clean. So once we have everything scraped off, we want to go through and wipe it out. And when we say wipe it out, it should be basically completely clean. Alright, now once we've wiped it out, we want to take a honing stone, go in there, and just make sure we're taking out any high spots that might have come up. So go ahead and hit every surface, make sure there's no burrs or any high spots until it feels nice and smooth. Alright, we now have the wheel mounted onto the spindle. We need to go ahead and start inspecting it prior to putting it over into the machine. So first thing we need to look at is this surface here. We need to make sure it's nice and smooth. If we find any imperfections, we want to go ahead and just try and stone those out lightly. After that, we need to make sure we're inspecting the O-rings. So we have 3 of those. They need to be in good condition, no tears or anything like that. Once we've done that, we can now get ready to go ahead and grease the O-rings before we put them in the machine. Alright, so now we're ready to grease the O-rings. So we want to make sure we're applying a liberal amount of grease all the way around the entire spindle on each O-ring area. So as you can see, this is very important, because if this is not a sufficient amount of grease, then we will get contamination into the spindle, which can destroy your spindle. Alright, so before we go ahead and put the spindle in, we want to do a final inspection on the bearing areas here, make sure that they're completely clean, nothing else has fallen in the way, we don't have any grit or anything else in there, and it should be, clean, as in paper towel, rub across it, comes out white type clean. Okay, now we have the spindle roughly craned into place. On each side of the casting of the machine, there's a slot where we need to align the pin of the spindle into the slot on the casting, and that needs to be on both sides of the machine. Okay, now that we got the spindle in place, we want to go ahead and seal all sides of the spindle with a liberal amount, again, of heavy-duty grease. So this is to prevent any coolant, grit, anything from getting into the spindle cavity and contaminating it. So we recommend a heavy duty, thick marine type grease that won't wash away and will keep the whole thing sealed until the next time you have to take the spindle out. Okay, now we've just reinstalled the chain connecting the spindle to the jack shaft. If you're changing out spindles, you need to make sure that the spacing between your two sprockets is such that the chain goes on smoothly, so you're not side loading the spindle at all. So we have that adjusted and we have the chain installed with the master link back on. Next step is we need to reconnect the quick disconnects on the hydraulic hoses. This is also a common failure point where once they're installed, you need to check and make sure that you have a good solid connection. Usually we like to tap on the top of them because if you do not and you don't get hydraulic pressure into the spindle, your machine will not start. Okay, so now we're on to the last couple steps where we want to check the bearing caps. Again, make sure they're clean, nothing's gotten contaminated in there since we've started this change, and we can then go ahead and replace them and bolt them down. Alright, so once you're installing the bolts, you want to make sure that you install them first, snug them in a cross pattern, kind of like you're putting lug nuts on a tire. Once you have them all snugged in, you can then go ahead and give them a final torque down. And you can see that we actually do get a little bit of grease seeping out. Alright, now that we got the bearing cap installed, when we go to put the strap back on, we want to make sure that the gasket is in good condition. Because as it goes in, it's going to seal over this area, which is again going to make sure that we don't want any coolant or anything entering into that cavity. So make sure that's in good condition. Alright, we got the spindle cap installed on this side now. Same thing, we want to do it in a star pattern. So when we snug it up first, that we want to make sure we get it kind of squared up before we do our final torque. After we get that installed, you should see again some grease kind of bubbling out from the side since we had a liberal amount of grease on there. Next thing, we're going to just go ahead and reinstall our hydraulic lines on here. And again, we want to make sure that these are connected tight and a solid connection so we don't have any leaks. Okay, so now we got the hood down on top and we went ahead and torqued the 4 bolts, 2 on each side of the machine. Again, these are very important because that's what keeps the grinding wheel guard down. In the event of a wheel failure, that's what's going to contain the wheels from coming out of the machine. So again, very important safety item there. Other than that, that's the end of this video.